It was supposed to be a routine flight, just another first-class journey from Los Angeles to Maui. For 16-year-old Jasmine Carter, it was more than that. It was the beginning of something she had dreamed of for years, 2 full weeks of uninterrupted time with her father. But what happened on that plane changed everything and exposed something far uglier than turbulence or delays. It was a confrontation born not out of seating confusion, but out of entitlement, prejudice, and the false comfort of assumed power. Stay with us, because what unfolded at 35,000 feet didn't just go viral, it revealed the quiet power of dignity and the true definition of strength. It began like any other boarding call. Flight 2276 to Maui. Clear skies, smooth boarding, the usual soft buzz of engines humming and flight attendants greeting passengers as they stepped into the first-class cabin. Jasmine Carter walked with calm confidence beside her father, Robert Carter. He moved with the ease of a seasoned traveler, matching Samsonite luggage, tailored blazers, quiet nods from airline staff. To the average onlooker, they were just another father-daughter pair on a luxury vacation. But Jasmine wasn't just any teenager. She was a straight-A student, a scholarship contender, a girl who spent more time in debate prep and volunteering at children's hospitals than on TikTok. This trip, it wasn't just a vacation. It was a promise, a rare pause in her father's high-stakes life in Washington, D.C. Her father, Robert Carter, wasn't a celebrity. He didn't need to be. As director of counterterrorism at the FBI, he was one of the most respected men in national security. But Jasmine didn't wear that name like armor. She didn't have to. Her quiet strength came from somewhere else entirely. She found her seat 2A, window seat, just the way she liked it. A view of the runway, the clouds, the sky. Her father settled in beside her in 2B, phone is set to airplane mode. Jasmine smiled, hopeful. But then everything shifted. A rustle of expensive fabric, a designer handbag swinging into view, and then the voice, sharp, loud, coated in entitlement. "Excuse me." The woman stood in the aisle, mid-40s, white, dripping in designer labels. Her expression? A mix of confusion and irritation that curdled into something darker the moment her eyes landed on Jasmine. "That's my seat," she snapped, pointing directly at 2A. Jasmine looked up, polite but firm. "I believe this is my assigned seat," she said, holding up her boarding pass. The woman snatched it without asking. "No, no, no. I always book window seats. Always." A few passengers nearby turned their heads. The cabin grew quieter. The tension? You could feel it in the air. Jasmine gently asked to see the woman's boarding pass. The woman huffed, then reluctantly pulled it out. Second aisle. Her name? Karen Whitmore. Now for most people, that would have been the end of it. A misunderstanding, an awkward chuckle. "Oops, sorry about that." But not for Karen. She didn't back down. She doubled down. Her voice rose again. "You need to move. People like you don't usually sit in first class anyway." And there it was. The real reason for her outrage. It wasn't about a seat. It was about Jasmine's skin color, her age, her very presence. Jasmine's posture straightened. She said nothing, just stared forward. Her fingers curled slightly against the armrest, her face calm, but her silence was louder than words. Karen kept going. "You want me to call flight staff? Security? Because I will." Before Jasmine could respond, Karen leaned over and did something unthinkable. She grabbed Jasmine's face, squeezing her cheek like she was scolding a child. Gasps erupted from nearby passengers. Phones were discreetly lifted, cameras turned on. Jasmine didn't flinch. She pulled away, quietly reached for her phone, and texted 3 words. "Dad. Situation here." Have you ever witnessed racism so bold, so personal? that you couldn't look away. This wasn't a scene from a movie. It wasn't a social experiment. It was real life. And at 35,000 feet, with no way out, Jasmine Carter, just 16 years old, was being told to her face that she didn't belong. Not because of anything she did, but because she was black. Flight attendants rushed in. Karen ranted louder. "My husband works for the Department of Justice," she screamed. "You'll be out of a job when he hears about this." The audacity, the privilege, and Jasmine still didn't say a word because she didn't need to. Her father was already making his way back down the aisle. And the moment his shadow appeared, tall, composed, silent, the atmosphere shifted. But that's a part of the story for later. Because the real story here isn't just about what Robert Carter did when he returned. It's what Jasmine didn't do. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She stood her ground. She held her seat. And in doing so, she forced everyone around her to witness what quiet dignity looks like when racism rears its head. In a world where injustice often hides behind wealth, whiteness, and influence, Jasmine Carter showed us what courage really looks like. Not loud, not violent, but steady, calm, and utterly unshakable. And Karen Whitmore? She picked the wrong teenager. Stay with us for part 2, because when Jasmine's father reappears, everything changes. And for once, entitlement doesn't win. If you've ever experienced or witnessed racism and felt powerless to stop it, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. And remember, silence can be powerful, but action backed by principle, that changes everything. Not all strength is loud. Sometimes strength is silent, measured, unshakable. At 35,000 feet, in a cabin full of strangers, a 16-year-old girl showed the world what grace under pressure truly looks like. Her name? Ariana Carter. And what she did, or rather, what she didn't do, left a plane full of people speechless. Let me take you back to that morning. Terminal 5, LAX. The sun had just crept over the horizon. The line for coffee stretched past Gate 22, and the boarding announcement for Flight 2276 to Maui echoed over the intercom. Among the early boarders was a tall, composed man in his late 40s, dressed in a tailored navy suit. He was accompanied by a young girl, slim, 5 feet 6 inches, hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, rolling a sleek carry-on behind her. That was Ariana Carter and her father, Robert Carter. For Ariana, this trip wasn't just a vacation. It was a gift. 2 uninterrupted weeks with her father. No work calls, no briefings, just time. Something she rarely got in her young life. While most kids her age were consumed with social media trends, Ariana was a different story. Honor student, speech and debate champion, volunteer at the pediatric ward. Her days were scheduled down to the minute, but she never complained. She didn't crave attention, she craved connection, and she missed her dad. You see, Robert Carter wasn't just a busy man. He was director of counterterrorism at the FBI. The kind of man who got phone calls in the middle of the night that could change the course of national policy. But to Ariana, he was just dad. As they boarded the flight and made their way to seats 2A and 2B, Ariana felt something rare: excitement. For once, the calendar was cleared. This time, he had promised. No agents, no reports, no last-minute emergencies, just the 2 of them, in the beaches of Maui. She slid into her window seat and exhaled. This was her favorite part of flying, watching the tarmac fade into clouds. Her father placed his phone in airplane mode and turned to her with a smile. "This is going to be different," he said. But even in that warm moment, destiny had other plans. Boarding continued. Then came Karen Whitmore, late 40s, platinum blonde, dripping with designer labels. She stepped into the first-class cabin like she owned it. Her heels clicked loudly as she stopped in front of row 2, stared at Ariana, and without even saying hello, said, "You're in my seat." Ariana looked up, a little startled but composed. "This is seat 2A, she said softly, holding up her boarding pass. Karen scoffed. "Number I, always book window, always. Show me that ticket." Ariana did, calmly, respectfully. And still, Karen wasn't satisfied. She snatched the pass from Ariana's hand without permission, read it, scoffed again, pulled her own, second aisle. It should have ended there, but it didn't. Karen's voice dropped, but her words cut deep. "Girls like you don't belong in first class." There it was, the truth behind her tantrum. She didn't see Ariana as a paying passenger. She didn't see her as a student, a daughter, a young lady excited for a vacation. She saw only one thing, a black girl in a place she felt she didn't belong. And she hated it. But Ariana? She sat still. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She didn't get up. She looked out the window, her reflection staring back at her. And in that moment, she made a choice. She would not shrink. Karen's words kept coming. She threatened to call security. She raised her voice. She waved her arms. She even leaned over and touched Ariana's face, gripping her cheek in some twisted attempt to assert dominance. Still, Ariana didn't react. She pulled out her phone, texted one line, "Dad, situation, row 2. Have you ever watched someone endure cruelty without letting it define them?" Ariana Carter didn't play the victim. She didn't ask for sympathy. She simply refused to surrender her dignity. Because that's what quiet strength looks like. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. It holds its head high. It breathes through pain. It waits for truth to speak louder than hate. The flight attendants arrived. The other passengers took notice. Phones tilted slightly, cameras rolling quietly. And Ariana still didn't speak because she didn't need to. Her silence said everything. In a world that too often rewards loudness, aggression, and privilege, Ariana Carter stood as something else entirely. A mirror for every person on that flight, for every viewer of this story, a reminder that the strongest people aren't always the loudest. Sometimes the ones who change everything say nothing at all. We often talk about heroes. Ariana didn't wear a cape. She didn't throw punches. She didn't even raise her voice, but she stood firm, in silence, with grace. And in doing so, she taught us all something profound. That true power doesn't need to prove itself. It simply is. If this story moved you, don't scroll past. Hit like, subscribe, and share it, because this world needs more examples of strength that whispers instead of shouts. And stay tuned, because in part 3, when her father returns, justice finally has a voice. Entitlement, it's subtle, sometimes it's loud. Often it hides behind names, job titles, and power that doesn't belong to the person wielding it. But every now and then, someone misuses a name they don't fully understand and ends up exposing their true character to the world. This is the story of Charlotte Wallace and how the power she borrowed turned into the weapon that undid her. It was a full flight from Los Angeles to Maui. Passengers were settling into their seats. First class was nearly full. Then came Charlotte Wallace, mid-40s, manicured, wearing heels a little too high for the jet bridge and a scarf that probably cost more than a mortgage payment. Her entrance said it all. "I don't wait. I expect. I deserve." When she reached row 2, she stopped sharply. There in seat 2A sat a young black girl, calm, composed, boarding pass in hand. Ariana Carter. Charlotte's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me," she snapped. "That's my seat." Ariana, respectful but firm, replied, "This is 2A, ma'am. It matches my ticket." Charlotte didn't even blink before snatching the boarding pass from Ariana's hand. Her own ticket? 2C. Now, at this point, most people would apologize, move on, maybe roll their eyes. Not Charlotte Wallace, because she wasn't just anyone. She was married to someone, and in her world, that meant she was someone too. She leaned closer, eyes sharp like glass. "Do you even know who my husband is?" she asked. Ariana stayed quiet, steady. Charlotte didn't wait for an answer. "Daniel Wallace, Deputy Attorney General of the United States. Maybe that rings a bell?" She said it loud enough for 3 rows in each direction to hear. "You're sitting in the wrong place, sweetheart." And just like that, her husband's name became her sword, a weapon she believed would cut through any rules, policies, or people in her way. Entitlement like this doesn't scream, it hisses. It speaks in threats disguised as reminders, in names dropped like business cards. Charlotte wasn't arguing over a seat anymore. She was asserting her belief in a social order, one where power protects certain people and excludes others. And Ariana? She was the outsider Charlotte was trying to push back into her place. Flight attendants arrived, professional smiles on their faces. Ariana calmly handed over her boarding pass. Everything matched. Charlotte's seat was 2C, not 2A, but she wasn't letting it go. "This is unacceptable," she hissed. "I fly this route monthly. I always sit at the window." Then came the clincher. "If you don't handle this," she said to the flight attendant, "I'll make one call, and trust me, it won't end well for you." The name Daniel Wallace hung in the air again, like a shield, like a trap. Passengers started paying attention. Some pretended to read, others angled their phones. These weren't just idle glances. They were witnesses, because everyone on that plane could feel it. This wasn't about a seat. It was about who gets to belong and who thinks they decide. What Charlotte Wallace didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that Ariana's father was on that plane too. And not just any father. Robert Carter, Director of Counterterrorism, FBI, the man her husband reported to. Entitlement doesn't ask who's watching, it assumes it doesn't matter. So Charlotte kept going. "This is absurd. I feel unsafe sitting next to her." And there it was, the final card in her deck, not just privilege, but prejudice, disguised as concern. But Robert Carter had returned to the cabin, and with every step toward row 2, the balance of power shifted. You could feel it, a stillness, like the moment before a storm, not of anger, but of reckoning. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flash a badge. He simply asked, "What seems to be the problem?" Charlotte turned, eyes wide, mouth still open mid-rant. He showed his credentials. She went pale. "Mrs. Wallace," he said with calm precision, "your husband Daniel reports directly to me." You could almost hear the blood drain from her face. The title she had used as a weapon? It had boomeranged right back at her. That's the thing about borrowed power. When it's taken from someone else, it can be taken away just as easily. Charlotte Wallace had built her arrogance on a name. But names don't excuse behavior. They don't erase bias. And they certainly don't justify humiliation. Robert didn't have her escorted off the plane. He could have, but he didn't. Instead, he asked her to apologize to his daughter, publicly. And when it was done, her seat, it was given to an elderly woman and coach who needed more legroom. Charlotte, escorted to a middle seat near the restrooms. Power isn't in the name you drop, it's in the respect you earn. Charlotte Wallace learned the hard way that true authority doesn't bully, it doesn't threaten, and it doesn't tolerate those who do. Her husband's title couldn't save her, because real power has nothing to prove. Have you ever witnessed someone try to use someone else's status to get what they want? What happened? Tell us in the comments below. And if this story struck a chord, share it. Because stories like this, Stories that remind us who we are and who we're not deserve to be heard. Subscribe for part 4, where justice gets the last word. Some people walk through life convinced the world will always bend for them, that their last name, their connections, their status are shields against consequence. But what happens when that arrogance runs headfirst into someone they shouldn't have underestimated? Someone who isn't just another passenger, someone with the power to change everything. This is the moment Charlotte Wallace learned exactly who she was messing with. By now, everyone in first class had heard her voice. Charlotte Wallace, dripping in luxury, burning with entitlement. She had already accused Ariana Carter, a 16-year-old black girl, of stealing her window seat. She had dropped her husband's title, Daniel Wallace, Deputy Attorney General, as if it were a universal pass. And when told she was actually in the wrong seat, she doubled down. "You don't understand who I am," she hissed. "Who my husband is. I'll have someone fired before this plane leaves the gate." But what Charlotte Wallace didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the girl she had publicly humiliated wasn't alone. Her father? He wasn't just some businessman or background dad quietly flipping through a newspaper. He was Robert Carter, Director of Counterterrorism at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and he was already on the plane. Robert had momentarily stepped away, called into a security briefing just before takeoff. 10 minutes he'd promised his daughter, and while he reviewed sensitive intel behind a closed door, his daughter sat silently, absorbing the venom of a stranger who believed she could bully her because of the color of her skin. But the moment Robert returned to the cabin, everything changed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no yelling, no threats, just a shift in the atmosphere. At 6 feet 2 inches, with a quiet intensity in his eyes, Robert moved down the aisle with calm purpose. Passengers fell silent. Even the flight attendants paused, recognizing the change in energy, like air pressure dropping before a storm. He approached row 2. Charlotte was still talking, loud, entitled, rattling off phrases like, "This is unacceptable. Do you want to lose your job? My husband is with the DOJ." She didn't even notice Robert standing behind her until he spoke. "Is there a problem here?" That voice, measured, deliberate, cut through the noise like a blade. Charlotte turned, confused, then annoyed. Then she saw the badge. Robert calmly reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulled out a leather holder, and briefly flashed his credentials. FBI Director, Counterterrorism. Charlotte's voice caught in her throat. The name she had used as a weapon, Daniel Wallace, now turned into a ticking clock in her head. Because Robert Carter wasn't just any federal official. He was Daniel Wallace's boss. They met regularly for security briefings. Daniel addressed him as Director Carter. And now that same man was standing inches from her, asking why she thought it was acceptable to treat a young girl with such disdain and disrespect, especially when that girl was his daughter. Charlotte stammered. Her confidence evaporated. "I didn't know. I would never. If I had realized she was your—" Robert raised a hand. Just a small gesture, but it stopped her mid-sentence. "It shouldn't matter who she is." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. No one, no child, no person should be treated that way. Not in first class, not in coach, not anywhere. The cabin was frozen in silence. Some passengers had stopped recording. Others kept filming. Everyone knew they were witnessing something they wouldn't soon forget. This wasn't a dramatic courtroom moment. It wasn't Hollywood. It was something far more powerful. It was a father, a federal leader, and a human being, drawing a line in the sand, not with threats or revenge, but with dignity. Charlotte stood there speechless. Her husband's title couldn't save her now, because the man standing before her didn't answer to him. He led him. Robert turned to Ariana, who had stayed quiet the entire time. She didn't need rescuing. She had held her ground with quiet grace. But now she finally saw what true strength looked like, not just in herself, but in her father. He didn't scold her attacker. He exposed her. And he did it without raising his voice. Sometimes the most powerful people in the room don't announce themselves. They let others reveal who they really are. And when the moment comes, they respond, not with fury, but with clarity. Charlotte Wallace thought she could get away with it. She believed the title her husband held gave her permission to act without consequence. But she didn't count on sitting across from someone whose power didn't come from a borrowed name. It came from knowing exactly who he was and exactly who he was raising. A girl with poise, with courage, and yes, with quiet, undeniable strength. What would you have done if you were in Robert Carter's shoes or Ariana's? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, because in part 5, what happens next brings the entire plane to its feet. When someone wrongs you, the urge to strike back can feel overwhelming. But what if you had the power to humiliate them completely and chose not to? What if you could serve justice, not with revenge, but with dignity? That's exactly what happened at 35,000 feet. And what one man did next would change the tone of the entire aircraft and every life on board. The cabin was still. No one spoke. No one moved. Robert Carter, director of counterterrorism at the FBI, stood in row 2 of the first-class cabin, facing a woman who had just spent 20 minutes demeaning and humiliating his daughter. Charlotte Wallace, middle-aged, wealthy, entitled, and now, for the first time, silent. Just minutes earlier, she'd been dropping her husband's name, Daniel Wallace, Deputy Attorney General, like it was a golden ticket. She'd threatened airline staff, accused a young girl of forging a ticket, and demanded that she be removed from her rightful seat. That girl, Ariana Carter, 16, poised, quiet, and Robert's daughter. Charlotte had no idea who she was messing with. Now she did, and now she waited, frozen in embarrassment, expecting Robert to do what powerful men are often portrayed to do: crush her, ruin her, kick her off the flight, and let the world watch her fall. But Robert Carter, he had other plans. "Captain," he said, turning calmly to the pilot who had come to the scene, "I appreciate you stepping in, but I don't think we need to remove anyone from this plane." There were audible gasps. Even the flight attendant looked surprised. Charlotte blinked, confused. Ariana remained calm, hands still in her lap, her breathing even. "We can all remain civil for the remainder of this flight," Robert added, "but some adjustments should be made." See, that's the difference between power and control. Power yells, control whispers. Power humiliates, control educates. Robert turned back to Charlotte, his expression still neutral. "Mrs. Wallace," he said, "you owe my daughter an apology." Charlotte hesitated. Her throat tightened. Her cheeks burned. But the silence in the cabin said it all. Everyone was watching. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, voice barely above a whisper. Robert tilted his head slightly, waiting. "I'm sorry for how I treated you," Charlotte said, turning to Ariana. "You didn't deserve that. I was out of line." Ariana looked up, nodded once, gracefully acknowledging, not excusing. Robert didn't force more words. He didn't need to. He let the moment linger, long enough to let the weight of what just happened settle in. Then, without a word, the lead flight attendant stepped forward. "Director Carter," she said softly, "we've just been notified there's an elderly passenger in economy. She recently had knee surgery and is struggling with a limited legroom." Robert didn't miss a beat. "Let's give her this seat," he replied, motioning to Charlotte's first-class spot. A few passengers smiled, a few clapped quietly. Charlotte's face turned a deep shade of crimson. She had gone from high horse to middle seat near the restrooms in row 28. But here's the thing. Robert didn't do it to humiliate her. He did it to restore balance, to teach, to lead. Because justice isn't about striking back. It's about rising above. Charlotte gathered her things in silence. She didn't argue, didn't make a scene. She walked past rows of passengers, eyes averted, many of them recording. In her place, a woman with silver hair and a walking cane was escorted to seat 2C, her face lit with disbelief and gratitude. Robert finally sat down next to his daughter. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then Ariana leaned over, voice just above a whisper. "You didn't have to do all that, Dad." Robert turned to her. "You were handling it beautifully," he said, "but you shouldn't have had to handle it alone." Ariana's eyes welled up, but she blinked them clear. There was no need for tears here, only understanding. We live in a world where injustice often goes unchecked, where loud voices get away with cruelty, but sometimes the right voice, the steady voice, changes everything. Robert Carter could have ruined her, could have called security, could have made headlines, but instead, he chose to elevate his daughter. He chose to set a standard for her, for Charlotte, and for everyone watching. Because true justice doesn't humiliate, it heals, and dignity is louder than revenge. Have you ever seen someone rise above a moment when they had every right to strike back? What did that teach you? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe in grace under pressure, subscribe now. Because in part 6, Ariana finally asked the question on everyone's mind. Will people like her ever truly belong in first class? And the answer might surprise you. Some stories end with a bang, others with a whisper that echoes louder than any shout. On Flight 276, what started as an ugly confrontation ended with a lesson, not just for the passengers on board, but for everyone watching, because the loudest voice wasn't the most powerful one. And the real hero? She never even raised hers. It had been a long hour, a passenger humiliated, a power play exposed, a cabin frozen in awe. Ariana Carter, 16 years old, had sat through every insult, every sideways glance, every word that tried to strip her of worth. But she never lashed out, never shouted back, never cried. And now as the plane settled into its cruising altitude and Charlotte Wallace was relocated to economy, something even more powerful than justice filled the air. Quiet, dignified strength. Robert Carter, Ariana's father, and the FBI's director of counterterrorism had done what many wouldn't. He stood up for his daughter without tearing anyone down. He didn't demand an apology with fire. He guided it with principle. He didn't humiliate Charlotte in front of the cameras. He let her own behavior do that for her. And now, as he sat beside his daughter in row 2A, Ariana finally asked the question that had been building since takeoff. "Dad," she began, eyes still fixed on the clouds outside, "do you think people like me will ever truly belong here?" She didn't say what here meant. She didn't need to. Not just first class, not just that cabin, but here, in spaces of power, privilege, and respect, without being questioned, challenged, or doubted. Robert looked at her, not as a government official, not as a protector, just as a father. "Ari," he said gently, "you didn't need to prove you belonged here. You were already enough the moment you sat down." Ariana stayed quiet. "But," he continued, "you didn't just belong. You elevated the entire space." He nodded toward the rows ahead, the passengers who had witnessed everything. They saw what real dignity looks like, and it didn't come from a title. It came from how you held your ground, without ever raising your voice. Dignity doesn't shout, it doesn't perform, it simply stands, calm, steady, and unshakable. What Ariana had shown wasn't just courage. It was a kind of poise many people twice her age hadn't yet learned. She didn't shrink to make others comfortable. She didn't roar to prove her worth. She existed fully in who she was. And that was the revolution. Later in the flight, a woman in a business suit who'd filmed part of the encounter approached Ariana with a smile. "I just wanted to say, you handled that better than most adults would have." Ariana thanked her quietly. Moments after that, a flight attendant gently passed her a handwritten note from another passenger. It read, "You made me rethink how I speak to my daughter. Thank you for your grace." When the plane landed in Maui, the first-class passengers didn't rush to disembark. Instead, they waited, letting Ariana and Robert walk ahead. Some clapped, a few nodded. One elderly man simply placed a hand over his heart as they passed. It wasn't a celebration, it was a recognition. On the ride to their beachfront villa, Ariana stared out at the ocean and said something her father would never forget. "You know, I didn't need her to like me. I just needed to remember that she couldn't define me." Robert smiled, because that was the moment he knew she had learned the lesson. You don't need to yell to be powerful. You don't need to fight to be strong. You just need to stand, calm, clear, and confident in who you are. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Ariana Carter boarded that flight with her father. She walked off with something more, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let the world decide your worth. The woman who tried to bring her down shouted for attention. But Ariana, she didn't have to say a word. And somehow, the whole world listened. If this story moved you, let it remind you. You don't have to shout to be heard. Dignity speaks without a mic. Strength doesn't demand the spotlight. It creates one. Share this video, leave a comment below, and hit subscribe. Because the world needs more stories like this. Not louder voices, just stronger ones. Sometimes a moment on a plane becomes a message to the world. It starts as a confrontation. It unfolds as a lesson. And by the time the wheels touch the ground, it becomes a reminder of everything we still need to work on. As people, as a society, as human beings. This is the final chapter in Ariana Carter's story, and this is the message that stayed with us all. When Flight 2276 landed in Maui, the sun had just begun to dip below the horizon. The runway shimmered with heat. Passengers stretched, unbuckled, checked phones, and prepared to move on with their vacations. But something was different. You could feel it. There was a shared understanding, like everyone had witnessed something meaningful, something bigger than just a seat dispute. Ariana Carter had faced what many silently endure every day: dismissal, doubt, disrespect. And she had faced it not with rage, not with a fight, but with unshakable self-respect. She never asked for attention, but her silence had done what 1,000 speeches couldn't. It made people reflect. As Ariana walked through the terminal with her father, Robert Carter, the man who had stood not just as an FBI director, but as a father with unwavering values, a woman approached them, maybe mid-40s, holding a carry-on and a look of sincerity. "Excuse me," she said carefully. "I just wanted to say, you changed the way I see things. Not just you," she said, nodding to Ariana, "but the way your dad handled it too." She hesitated, then added, "I think I've been more like her, the other woman, than I care to admit." Then she walked away. That wasn't the only one. A teenage boy, probably 17, wearing headphones and a hoodie, caught up beside Ariana as they headed to baggage claim. "I recorded the whole thing," he admitted, "but I deleted it. Felt wrong, like I was filming something sacred." He looked her in the eye. "You're braver than anyone I know." Then he gave her a fist bump and melted back into the crowd. This wasn't just a viral moment. It was a mirror, held up to everyone watching, and what it reflected was uncomfortable truth. People began to recognize how quickly they judge, how easily they overlook dignity when it's quiet, how fast they are to believe the loudest voice in the room, and how rare it is to witness grace under fire. Later that night, in their beachside villa, Ariana and Robert sat on the porch, the sound of waves rolling in beneath a blanket of stars. No news crew, no headlines, just a father and daughter, and a silence that felt complete. "You know," Ariana said finally, "I didn't think anything I did really mattered." Robert turned to her, brow furrowed. "Why would you say that?" "Because no one listened. Not really. Not until you came back." Robert leaned forward. "Ari," he said gently, "you weren't invisible. You were undeniable. They didn't hear your voice, but they felt your presence, and that matters more than you know. Dignity isn't loud. It doesn't compete, but when it shows up, it shifts the energy of every room it enters." Ariana didn't have to go viral to be impactful. She didn't have to shout or rage or make a scene. She just had to be herself, confident, composed, unwavering. And by doing so, she became something more than just a girl in first class. She became a message. In the days that followed, the story quietly circulated, not because it was trending, but because it was real. People told it at dinner tables, in classrooms, in staff meetings, in text threads between friends. Not because it was sensational, but because it was true. And long after Charlotte Wallace faded from memory, Ariana Carter remained, as a reminder that strength doesn't always roar, that grace can disarm even the loudest ignorance, that standing your ground with dignity can leave a deeper impact than any shouted insult. If you've ever felt out of place in a room, this story was for you. If you've ever been told, explicitly or silently, you don't belong here, this story was for you. And if you've ever stayed silent, not out of fear, but out of strength, this story is you. Share it, live it, and most of all, remember it. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who changes everything. Dignity doesn't shout, but it always echoes. Subscribe, comment, and share this message, not for the views, but for the vision. The vision of a world where people like Ariana Carter never have to prove they belong.